about a dozen Iranian fishermen who had been captured by Somali pirates. Now, the U.S. Navy and the Iranian Navy and also the Iranian Revolutionary Guard do maintain protocols to avoid incidents in the Gulf, and these have been very successful. So there are communications constantly between the U.S. Navy in the Gulf and the Iranian Navy and military. And I think the fact that the U.S. Navy rescued these dozen Iranian fishermen really was probably not very popular amongst some of the war hawk neocons here in Washington. They probably would have rather had the Somali pirates keep those Iranian fishermen. But I think that there's wiser heads are prevailing right now, especially in the U.S. Navy, the Fifth Fleet in Bahrain, and they have to deal with the Iranians on a daily basis. And obviously, they don't want to see any kind of war because they know, our fleet is pretty vulnerable to Iranian missile attacks over there. And as you mentioned, asymmetric warfare. Iran has a lot of influence in Iraq. And look, not all the U.S. troops have left Iraq. There's still, at certain bases there, we still have the private security contractors there. We still have a whole load of State Department personnel there. And these people would all be sitting ducks if the Iranians decided to activate their allies in Iraq. So the Pentagon, probably more than anyone else knows what's at stake if these war hawks get their way.
Now, Wayne, I want to put out a nuanced statement here because our detractors will always do what they do. They'll always build straw men that don't really represent who we are or what we are, and then go out and have a sword battle with the straw man and claim that they've defeated it. But if you go back into October to November, it was all over the Israeli news, all over the European news that a strike was imminent. The Washington Times reported that Netanyahu wanted it. He believes politically that'll make him popular. And then right on time, all of my military sources said, yeah, it's on. We're being told, get ready. Move the troops to Kuwait, out of Iraq, get ready to back up the attack, getting troops covertly into Israel, now admitted months later. And the point is they were moving and green lighting. So we said, get on air, call Congress, tell them don't do this, get pressure on the military, listen to the former admirals, former chairman of the Joint Chiefs, Mullen, who said it was a disaster, the former head of Mossad, who Netanyahu fired because he wouldn't go along with this. This is not a good idea. Even, the top globalists are having a fight on this. And then they spin it and say, oh, we're always hearing about war with Iran. It's never going to happen. And then now it's in the news that they're moving towards a strike. Israel says they may strike. But the establishment puts out their operatives to say, oh, that's ridiculous. There's not going to be a war, so that we can't build opposition. Same thing with the NDAA. The first month, they have a debate saying it doesn't affect citizens. Then later they say, you bet it does. After they'd already passed it, then Obama signed it. He said he wouldn't sign it to kill opposition because, well, he's not going to sign it anyways. These are tactics. You've learned them. I've learned them. You've been on Capitol Hill for decades. I see you on C-SPAN there writing notes during these hearings. But the public gets fooled by these tricks, so they keep pushing for war while separately saying it's asinine that they're going to have a war as a psychological tactic so that we can't build an opposition to it. Then if we're successful and back off war for the third or fourth time, as we know 5 years ago, Cheney was about to do it, attack our own ships. New Yorker magazine, Cy Hirsch, is the same thing. Then when we're successful backing them off, oh, see, there was never a threat. Do you agree with how I'm breaking down their psychological operation or PSYOP? And do you concur with what I'm saying?
Well, of course, and we have the master of this cognitive dissonance, Cass Sunstein, is basically the propaganda czar for the Obama White House. So, you look at all his friends and colleagues, and even his wife, Samantha Power. She's the person who's dreamed up all these Arab Spring revolts and these themed George Soros-type color revolutions all around the world. And some of them, obviously, the one in Iran failed. The one in Tunisia and Egypt were successful, although they're probably ruining the fact that they even supported the one in Egypt. But I think you're correct. Yeah, this is a propaganda. Most of this is a propaganda war where they're just trying to get into people's heads, make them think something when in fact they're doing something entirely different.
From your decades of research, and I respect your analysis, your view on this, what do you think is going to end up happening with Iran? Or what are the 2 or 3 different probable scenarios that we're going down?
Well, we already know that this, the New York Times, once again, as is its wont, has put out this false information about Iran trying to develop a nuclear weapon. This is the same nonsense that Judy Miller was putting out when she worked for the New York Times. We're seeing it play out again. There's been really no change in that program. It's still CIA came out in 2003 with a new finding that Iran did have some nuclear weapons intentions, but it is basically a peaceful nuclear power program now. But they're still pushing this meme that Iran wants a nuclear weapon, and as long as they do that, they're going to have support from some of these lick-spittle Republicans.
All right, stay there. I want to hear where you think all this is going, and the war rhetoric intensifying. Wayne Madsen's our guest, WayneMadsenReport.com. I'm Alex Jones with Infowars.com and, of course, Prisonplanet.tv. We'll be back tonight, 7 o'clock, but stay with us. More coming up. Okay, we've got Wayne with us till 5 after. Then it's going to be your phone calls and a bunch of news for the rest of the third hour. But going back to Wayne Madsen, investigative journalist, former officer at the National Security Agency in very secretive areas, joins us with his perspective on Iran. Colonel Shaffer was on during the last hour, and he said yes, and he hasn't talked like this before. He said, yes, it's moving in the direction towards an attack on Iran as an October surprise. But that's not foregone conclusion. Cooler heads may prevail in the military, and I'm getting that that's basically what you're implying.
You really can't divorce what's going on with Iran and this saber-rattling from the presidential campaign. There's only 2 Republican candidates who are dead set against, going to war with Iran, and that's Ron Paul and somebody we hardly ever hear about. He gets less attention than Paul. That's Buddy Roemer from Louisiana. But all the rest of them are trying to outdo one another on, who's going to nuke Tehran first, especially Rick Santorum. And I have a story up today, 2 stories up about Santorum, why he has surged ahead. The man was on the board of directors for the Israel Project, which is a totally pro-Likud think tank here in Washington with deep pockets, and his 2 advisors, his 2 chief foreign policy advisors, are none other than Michael Ledeen and Richard Pearl. If you remember who those individuals were, they were the chief architects and cheerleaders for the U.S. Intervention in Iraq, and they're certainly at the forefront of those who are calling for the overthrow of the quote-unquote mullahs in Iran.
So continuing along those lines, are we closer to war?
Well, I think what we're going to see here is it's all going to be based on the presidential campaign. Now, Romney, of course, has also called for U.S. troops to not only go back into Iraq, but get into it with the Iranians. But, we know that Mitt Romney is a virtual, this guy will bend with the wind. He sticks his finger up in the air and sees which way the wind is blowing. But I don't see Romney. If Romney's the nominee, I think that this war talk will diminish. But if it's somebody like Santorum or a Newt Gingrich, who's also in bed with these war hawks, then I think we're going to probably see Obama try to get from under the issue by at least covertly supporting an Anglo-Israeli and maybe French attack on the Iranians. You mentioned that the U.S. troops now are now stationed in Israel, and they're especially for anti-missile defense there. So I think we've got the baseline for either overt U.S. military action or covert action using the Israelis, British, and French as sort of as a cover for us. But I think all this depends on the presidential election, because Iran, because of this constant drumbeat for war by most of these Republican candidates, Obama's going to have to respond somehow to that.
Well, you're right. We're going to come back in a moment for 5 more minutes, and I want to get your take on Jesse Ventura. The reason I've covered this quite a bit is that it's now been confirmed to be a complete lie. They hired Ventura at MSNBC and then fired him, but kept him under contract and threatened to sue him if he talked bad about the war. And he was under contract for 3 years. Now they're just trying to assassinate his character, claiming he's reckless driving in California when he's in Minnesota. That was a fraud. Now claiming he says he loves it when troops die at a wake in front of people. I mean, this comes right out of Central Casting. He's totally denied it and is, of course, going to sue everybody involved. And he's not litigious, but he will sue people. He's well known for it. But Fox News and others just don't care. Something like Jesse Ventura being attacked always by Rupert Murdoch outfits the last month with patently fake stories. And then when he threatens to sue them, they just remove it. They don't retract. I have been at the receiving end of this because, you see, as a constitutionalist, as a Ron Paul-type libertarian patriot, I'm what Fox News hates because they're the fake version, to a certain extent, of what I am or what Ron Paul is. So they need to hold that end of the spectrum to control the right wing, if you use that outdated, stupid term. I'm into freedom. Not about left and right, but they see us as right wing, so they hate us. They want to basically say that restaurant across the street, don't eat there. They've got cockroaches the size of your chihuahua. And it's not true. Fox News has the cockroaches. My business, my operation doesn't. My business is liberty and freedom. Their business is globalization and tyranny. Same thing with the leftist control arms. They're there to be gatekeepers on the left. Ford Foundation, the rest of it. Wayne, in closing, I saw this as key with Ventura. Right as he goes into Mexico, right as they know he doesn't have cell phones till he gets to his place in Baja, and then that's Skype, they come out and say, yeah, he was at a bar telling a family he's glad their son died, so I knocked him out. And right as the guy has a book come out, then I looked him up. And what's creepy is he's tied in with what you just said, Richard Pearl, and he's setting up a domestic group to deal with domestic extremists and train police in Dallas nationwide. I mean, I guess they said, okay, here's your first order. We're going to make you a big hero, but destroy Jesse Ventura.
Right, and I think this has to do a lot with Jesse Ventura's support for Ron Paul. Let's not forget, Pearl is also one of the chief advisors to Rick Santorum. Now, let's turn the tables on Mr. Santorum. I'm reporting, basically updating an old story today. Rick Santorum started the 10 State College Republicans in 1977 as a freshman, which is kind of odd as a freshman, with the help of a guy named Phil English, former congressman from Erie, Pennsylvania. Now, English was arrested in Erie in the 1980s for soliciting sex from an underage African-American male. This was very much covered up. English was the head of the Pennsylvania College Republicans, helped Santorum start the 10 State College Republicans, and 1977 was the same year that Jerry Sandusky began the Second Mile Foundation. Now, what did...
Oh, my God.